although that has left us in a situation where silver heads for the biggest deficit in decades, according to the Silver Institute. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and excited because we had some news out in the last few days showing that the silver market is in a deficit. Not only a deficit, we're in record deficit territory, which, well, in some ways is not so ideal for the world, although for us silver investors and enthusiasts and owners of silver, certainly I think supports what we've been talking about a lot on the channel with a lot of the guests we have here. And fortunately, to dig into that a little bit further, someone who is most certainly a qualified expert on the silver market, especially on the supply side, my dear friend Shawn Khunkhun of Dolly Varden Silver. So Shawn, great to have you in here and shed some light on some of these reports we had out last week. And how's everything going with you, my friend?
Yeah, everything's great, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I always like to remember that you helped get the ball rolling at Dolly Varden when we were a $20 million market cap. You saw more in me and the company than I can see it myself in that moment. So I just wanted to thank you for recognizing the opportunity. And today, we're a little bit bigger despite it being a tough environment for silver equities. But I'll start off with one little share, and my share is, our Canadian government has been pretty good about getting mining investment going. We have some tax advantageous opportunities here in the country that produce a lot of mineral exploration. And most recently, the government announced like a critical element tax credit. And really everything under the sun is a critical element, okay, by their definition.
Right.
However, gold and silver aren't, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, there is no substitute for silver. There is no, like, it is the most critical element, like, whether it's in the industrial components or, it's insane that it is not considered a critical element at this point. Now, this is a new program, and I'm sure I'll be part of the lobby to make the government officials who've made copper and zinc and every other metal under the sun critical. If we show them what silver really is, they'll get it, and it too will be added. But it's just funny how you do get these situations in life where, like, it is like there's like First Majestic always says, on their website, there's no substitute for silver, right? Like there's. And so I just think it's laughable that the Canadian government doesn't have it as a critical metal.
Well, it seems like they're having a difference of opinion on gold and silver with a lot of folks. In fact, here's an article from someone I know you know well, Frank Justra, mentioning that the central bank of almost every country in the world owns gold except for Canada. They had their interesting gold sales right at the bottom back in 2016 before the price was rallying that year. So let's take a look at today's silver price, which, again, we're recording on Monday, November 21st. This will be airing on Tuesday, the 22nd. You see silver just below $21, down a bit, had been floating in that $22 to $29 range the past year or two, although that has left us in a situation where silver heads for the biggest deficit in decades, according to the Silver Institute. This came out on Friday, as global demand for silver expected to rise 16%, creating the biggest deficit, which comes in at 194 million ounces. Any thoughts on that? We'll dig into the supply side, but obviously I think it's something that people wonder about, the price being down at the same time you have a record deficit. But what was your reaction upon reading this news last week?
I got to touch on one thing before I go there, if that's okay, Chris. And that's
Sure,
you
please.
you you, you mentioned Frank Justra, and in 2002, there was an article in a local paper here in Vancouver, and it was a picture of Frank in his office, and it was a picture of his back. And the article said it was 2002, and the article read Frank's back. And what he was back into was mining, 2002. And he got behind, what is now today Newmont, right? It was Gold Corp, an iteration of Gold Corp through Glamis. He got behind what is now today Wheaton Precious Metals, which was Silver Wheaton. And that's just what he did in the mining side of the space. So I had the pleasure to move into the Fiore offices back in March. And it was on the back of a conversation I had with Mr. Giustra, where 20 years after that article, that was 2002, he's now seeing this is the time for precious metals, for gold, for silver. And so Frank's back 2.0. And it's going to be really interesting to see. We actually had him up to Dolly Varden in the summer. And no, it's just, listen, I'm very, very honored and pleased, to be surrounded by, not only brilliant billionaire investors that are successful at launching companies like Mr. Giustra, but, my strong technical team. But getting back to your question, I just had to touch on the fact that if you're new to investing in precious metals, there's a legend who's witnessed and prospered off of the last three big cycles we've had in the last 40 years in the space. His timing is impeccable, and if you look at where metal prices were back in 2002, and where they went up, in the case of silver, it was a 10x. It went up 10 times from the lows in the early 2000s to the highs in 2011. Went from under $5 to $50. And in the case of gold, we went from 300 to 1900. Anyway, so, there's a legend that's making a call, and he's not the only one. There's other notable, sophisticated, astute investors in the space who've been very successful saying this is the time to get exposure. And actually, they're saying there's actually been no better time in history on a relative basis. And so that's encouraging. But to really answer your specific question, Chris, what attracted me to silver specifically was that only, and you know this better than anybody, 30% of silver comes from pure silver mines. So we talk about the deficits. We talk about the deficits today and the shortages today. What are they going to be in 5 years when all those big base metal mines don't spit out all that silver because the cost is too much to get them into operation, or you can't get water, or the local community says, no, thank you, not in my backyard. So I'm here because we haven't taken out the 1980 $50 high. We touched it up in 2011, but we're nowhere near. We're half the price today. So silver's got the best outlook in terms of where it's trading, where it has been trading. You look at the supply demand fundamentals, you look at all these other factors, and then we haven't even touched on the growing industrial usages, right? Solar panels, or if we are going to get to where some of these countries want to get to in terms of EVs and building out the EV infrastructure. There is no substitute for silver. There's a shortage of silver. There is literally a list of maybe a dozen companies that are real silver plays that you can own. And one of them, one of the biggest and best and greatest, just became a gold company a week ago. I'm referring to Pan American Silver. And their bid to buy Yamana's assets with Agnico Eagle. So, one of the handful of names that investors could go to play silver is now a gold company. So the list just got smaller.
Yeah, and certainly you mentioned how we have a lot of that silver coming from the 9 primary miners. I continue to read almost somewhat daily about the permitting issues really becoming tougher for some of these big copper deposits. I know you see that up firsthand. Is that matching what you're seeing, where it seems like even with a higher copper price, especially then you add in the time lag from when some of the new project actually gets into production there, which takes quite a while. But anything in particular on the permitting side, because I know that's something people have been concerned about.
Okay, let's pretend for a second that we didn't have it like this big inflation. Let's pretend for a second that People were okay with a mine in their backyard. Let's pretend for a second that there was an abundance of water and tremendous infrastructure. And let's pretend for a second that you lived in this perfect, utopian, harmonious world. If you were to make a sensational new discovery, which every anomaly that you drill test, maybe 1 in 10,000 become an economic mine. So let's say you were lucky, you had lived in this utopia and you won the lottery and you hit something that was going to become a mine. You're 10 years away from it becoming a mine in the fastest, best scenario. So where are we going to get this metal, Chris? And that's where when people talk about triple digit silver, I don't react. If they said quadruple digit silver, I might go, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. But triple digit silver, wake me when it's here, because it should be here already.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with what we're seeing here, where we have a big deficit. You can also take a look at the Silver Institute numbers, where you can see that 900 million ounces being mined in 2016 has been steadily falling. They're forecasting 843 million ounces this year, although I just wonder if we're seeing these deficits now and you have a lot of these miners nearing the cost of production. What do you see this looking like 5 years out from now? Is there any way aside from a higher price that this gets resolved? I mean, I suppose some of these mandates to decarbonize the world, perhaps they just don't get met yet. I think that's something that'd be useful, especially from your perspective, for people to hear, where okay, it's tough for some people who bought silver at a little bit of a higher price when they see the $21 level now. But is there, aside from the mandates not being met, is there a way other than the higher price that this ends up going forward?
No, you're going to need a combination of factors to resolve this issue. And the combination of factors, so you need a higher price, right? And the way we look at that higher price is you need a sustained average over a 3-year period of that higher price to incentivize the development and the further exploration of new discoveries. And so the way this gets resolved is with that higher sustained price, you can then start being able to economically produce lower grade material. And that's where you satisfy the demand. And I've run some sensitivity analysis and where you'd need that price to go. And so I think conservatively is we need the silver price to move up by about 65% from its current levels, and we need it sustained there for over a 3-year period. And then we could start to see some supply come onto the system. But again, that's not how markets work, particularly in the commodity business. They're not that orderly, right? So it is going to be violent. It is going to be, a situation where momentum takes over, and you're going to have the silver price, in my estimate, go up by 400 or 500% before you reach, some of those longer term averages to sustain projects. And it's a great time to, again, I was talking to some people that are new to investing, and I just kept it really, really simple for them, because I said, look, you can go out and you can get a coin, up here in Canada, you could maybe get, for $30 an ounce, give or take $1 or $2, you can get yourself an ounce of silver. So for about 30 Canadian dollars. Now, price of silver goes to 90, goes to 120. You've quadrupled your money. That's great. You know what? That's a great investment. Now, if you were to invest in a company like Dolly Varden, for example, that has 140 million ounces in the ground, that's where you get the leverage, and that's where the silver equities really shine. Or if it's a company like First Majestic, and you'd know First Majestic's annual production better than I would, but what are they producing? 8-9 million ounces a year? Is that about right?
We had record production of 8.8 silver equivalent ounces last year. So that's including their gold production too.
Okay.
Last quarter, rather.
Last quarter, yeah. So and there's a company where, right now on some of their projects they're at a break even. Silver, and this is where you've got the big billionaire backer of the space, Eric Sprott, who's an accountant, because he understands this better than anybody, is when you start to, the profitability for these companies that are at a break even today, when you get the price rise, you become, $5, you become 100% more profitable. $10, 200% more profitable. And that's where the leverage comes in. And, I haven't looked at FR recently, but that's a stock in previous bull markets was a $40 stock. And that's where it'll go if silver goes to $30, $35. What does it do if silver goes to $40, $50, $60, $70?
Yeah, and also not to the downside, but perhaps putting a bit of a floor. There was a great article by Jeff Clark of goldsilver.com, and he was mentioning something I've thought about, how the miners have already lowered their costs about as much as they can. The persistent low silver prices forced them to do so. So we did see cleaning up of the balance sheets over the past decade. Would you agree with that? And that it's kind of harder, especially now where we do have the inflation here. Diesel costs are up. Cost of just about everything is up. So it's
so what I would say to that is, with the price going from 4 to 40 in silver in the 2000s, and with the gold price going from 300 to 1900, everyone tried to get as much exposure and leverage to as many ounces as possible. So the industry went from having collectively $1 billion in debt to having $10 billion of debt. They went from having hundreds of millions of shares to having literally over trillion shares collectively, common shares. So all of that debt and all of that dilution, despite the rising prices, the performance of the equities were good, but they weren't as good as they could have been. We've gone through a decade consolidation where debt has been brought down. All of those marginal projects have either been shelved or divested. So my point is, the industry has never run more lean ever. So we are positioned, if the price rises, these mining shares are going to go up parabolically. It's a perfect storm.
Yeah, it does seem like it. Here's one other one I'd like to run by you, because this was about a week or two ago, back on November 8th. Report from Goldman of why they see gold soaring 30% when the Fed starts cutting rates, to bring us to a $2,200 gold price. Interesting to imagine where silver would be in that environment. Although
50.
I mean, we're seeing even that recent rally, now this is happening with the Fed still cutting rates, and it does make you wonder what we actually see when we get to the point where, I'm sorry, with the Fed raising rates, which makes you wonder what happens when we get to the point where they're cutting rates, which, despite debate over a timeline of tapering or pivoting or anything like that, I mean, we see expense. I was reading this morning, expense for the national debt here in the U.S. is going to be taking half of the tax revenue right there. There's some factors that could be delayed. Yet, as you and I have talked about before, a lot of the things that have drawn people into gold and silver, we're starting to see these things hit now, which is just certainly going to add to the demand side going forward as well.
Chris, you and I were together, I think it was August 31st.
In an silver symposium.
Silver symposium, silver in Spokane. And the price has gone up by 25% since that symposium. Okay, in the price of silver. Now, I remember attending a morning session where there was, I don't know, 300 people, or 300 people were in attendance of the symposium. And I remember telling the panel, look, there's going to come a moment in the future, there will be 3,000 people here. There might come a time where there's 30,000 people attending these types of events. I was at very such events in 2010 and in 2011. And I just remember making the comment at the time about the cryptocurrencies, that had this been a crypto conference and not a silver conference, in that moment, there would have been 10, maybe 20 times the number of people there. And my point was, we all, despite the price of silver going up 25% in the last 2.5 months, crickets. The equities are flat, right? Silver equities in the last 12 months are down 25%. Those are the best ones. Yep. This is the industry is on sale. It isn't going to be on sale forever. And I just think that this is the moment where you need to go out and you need to get exposure to the space. It's, we're telling you all the reasons. The report, I was talking to Michael Dorenzo from the Silver Institute this morning. This is a moment where guys like you and me need to pound on our desks, and we need to create as much awareness, because we are doing people a service here by drawing their attention to the one wealth preservation tool. And again, you got to start where you have behind you all that physical, right? And start with the physical, and then from there, if you want to speculate, get yourself the go-to silver mining stocks, get your first Majestics. I'm sure you have a list, and companies like mine, Dolly, that are making discoveries on a regular basis and adding to their mineral inventory.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I know it's tricky for people that, you see the price a little bit lower. Yet going back to what you said earlier about Frank back in 2002, and you look, gold and silver have actually done quite well if you're able to take that step back and look over time. So again, not giving licensed financial advice, but that's why I continue to highlight these things, such as the deficits that we are seeing here. And hopefully that points out some things for people to consider going forward. And Shawn, before we wrap up here, perhaps you could talk a little bit about what's been going on with Dolly. I know you just had some drill results out, and perhaps for people who are into the mining stocks and looking for exposure there, you could give an update of what's going on.
Yeah, so Dolly's special because of its location. We're in a safe, stable mining country like Canada, where we've, without mining, we're naked up here in the north. So you need mining. And despite incompetent governments, they'll allow us to mine because they need our tax dollars. And in addition to stable governments, we've got a really well endowed part of the world. There's been 800 million ounces of silver discovered in neighboring properties. And on our property, we've got just under 150 million ounces. So that's a lot of silver exposure. But my strategy has been to try to grow that mineral inventory. And there's two ways I know how to do that. Number one, it's through drilling, through exploration. So I've hired a team of the best scientists and the best engineers. And these scientists on a regular, it almost seems like a weekly basis, are coming up with new discoveries. This one here is big because if you scroll down a little bit, Chris, there's an image, and if you just stay on this image here for a second. So the red block that you see at the top of the page is the existing deposit, and then those yellow lines, as we systematically step out with drilling, we're finding more. So what we've essentially done is we've tripled the strike length of the deposit, and we're finding more silver in the ground, and so ultimately it is increasing our mineral inventory. And the way these mining companies trade is, like, right now we're trading at about 70 cents for every silver ounce we've identified in the ground. But in a bull market, companies can trade at $5 an ounce in the ground. So as we see the price go up to, $25, $30, if it goes beyond there, that $5 metric is just a average. Some companies have traded higher. But I think because of our location, Canada, because of the grade, like we've got some of these discoveries are 4,300 grams per ton. We're measuring silver in the kilos per ton. So this is very, very valuable rock. The last press release, this is $30 a ton rock. So very, very economic. It's a wide ore body. It goes to surface. So what we've been doing is we've got some great shareholders. So Hecla Mining, and Hecla is a go-to silver stock that your followers should look at. They produce 40% of U.S. silver, and with a recent acquisition in Canada, they're going to be producing 40% of Canadian silver. So they're a go-to safe jurisdiction name. It's one of the best performing silver companies in the last 3 years. And Hecla's grown a lot through some brilliant maneuvering from their strong technical team in terms of discoveries and engineering of projects, but also through acquiring smaller entities. And they've got a CEO at the helm that's been operating the company for 20 years that's got ambitions to really to grow. So, again, we've got something that's special because of its size, because of its grade, because of its location. In addition to Hecla, we've got other investors like Eric Sprott. And so really 90% of our company is held by just a few big strategic investors. And it's why our shares, despite other silver companies going down 25%, we're actually up about 15% this year. And it's because we're making discoveries and we're adding ounces. And Chris, you know me really well, and you know I'm having a lot of fun leading this team. And it's easy when you're winning, right? And we're winning through drilling, and it's easy to get more aggressive and to push things when they're working.
Well, it's also been impressive to see what you've done there in the just over 2 years now that you've been running Dolly. And, I was always struck by the confidence you had, not only in your ability, but the plan of what you were going to do. So, really excited for you about the progress you've been making. And, Shawn, perhaps you could just let people know if they have questions, would like to find out more, what is the best way to do that?
You can go to our website, dollyvardensilver.com. We're active on Twitter at Silver Varden. There's some contact numbers on the website. We got a toll-free number. We love hearing from investors. So, 1-800-321-8564. Call us. I love talking to investors, whether it's about silver, whether it's about mining stocks, whether it's about, soccer. Love hearing from investors. And that's it, Chris. Thanks for having me on. And again, we'll follow up in the future. And all the hard work that you've done, going to Washington, writing your book, being an advocate. We're going to look back when we get some real price discovery, and it's the big silver short, right? You coined it. Like, this is going to be a situation where your followers and are gonna be very, very grateful. And I'm already grateful because I've gone through a cycle before, and I know you have too, and we both know what's coming, and we're positioned for it.
Well, I appreciate that. And you know where I stand. I think that there's going to be a time where people are going to be grateful for having silver, especially with the things that we see going on in the world. So appreciate that you're out there talking about it, also that you've been moving your project forward, and just great to catch up with you again, get your insight on the supply and demand. And we will have to look forward to doing this again soon, my friend.
Hey, all the best, Chris. Thanks for having me on.